I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Board of Embalmers and Funeral Directors. It's Monday, December 14, 2015, 1:05 p.m. Roll call.
Jack Marchbanks,
Here.
Brian Chandler,
Here.
Greg Boyer,
Here.
and Robert Wasco.
Here.
Item 1.02, we have a remembrance of Austin Singletary. I'd like to have a moment of silence and remembrance and to honor Austin Lee Singletary, our prior college intern who passed away November 25th, 2015. He worked hard for our board and our staff and gave us great service, and he will be sadly missed by all. If we could have a moment of silence, please. Item 2.01, consideration of the October 2015 minutes. Those of you had enough time to review the minutes and go over the minutes. And
Mr. Chairman, after reviewing the minutes, I find that they are correct and accurate, and I'd like to make a motion to approve.
I'll second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
roll call, or any discussion?
Mr. Boyer,
Yes.
Mr. Chandler,
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks,
Yes.
Mr. Wasco.
Yes.
Motion approved.
3.01, Ronald Garr, application for initial registration of apprentice. He has asked the board to deliberate on his application without his appearance. Mr. Garr's criminal history includes, in 1993, he was charged with rape and kidnapping and was found guilty of sexual battery. I believe we have to give Mr. Garr an answer, and if we do not approve his application, he will have a right to a hearing. Do I have a motion regarding Mr. Garr's application?
Mr. Chairman, in the past, when there were questions on an applicant, we always invited that person to come before the board in case there were questions. I know I always have asked several different questions, based on information that we didn't have. And so based on him not wanting us to deliberate, there's really nothing to deliberate except what we have on paper. And based on that, I'd like to make a motion to refuse to grant the registration based on the applicant being convicted of a crime including moral turpitude. Second that, Mr. Chairman.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Will be roll call, right?
Roll call.
Roll call?
Mr. Wasco,
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks,
Yes.
Mr. Boyer,
Yes.
and Mr. Chandler.
Yes.
Motion passes.
And we're moving on to item number 3.02, recommendation for facility licenses. We have 3 new facility licenses, 2 changes of ownership, 2 funeral homes for approval, and 1 name change as listed in the agenda. And all the paperwork is in order. And do I have a motion to approve the applications?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Chandler,
Yes.
Mr. Wasco,
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks,
Yes.
Mr. Boyer.
Yes.
Motion passes.
And we have item 3.03, recommending individual licenses. We have 6 new applicants, 1 request to go inactive, and 1 request to be reinstated as listed in the agenda. All the paperwork is in order. Do we have a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, make a motion to approve items 3.03 under licensure.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Boyer?
Yes?
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Motion passes.
And item 3.04 is an information item. No motion is required. It has 5 manager changes, 13 issued a registration number, and 15 who have certified apprentices as listed in the agenda. Does anybody have any questions? We'll move on to item 4, continuing education. 4.01, continuing education exemption. We have one 50-year exemption, and all the paperwork is in order. And do we have a motion to give a 50-year exemption? And that would be to Barth Littleton, and he has a dual license.
Mr. Chairman, make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Mr. Boyer?
Yes?
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
50 years is a long time, Jeff.
It's not experience.
Yeah.
And still in continuing education, we have item 4.02, continuing education programs. And that's a list of all the programs for the people who want to give classes out to give continuing education to their attendees.
Based on, Mr. Chairman, based on there was no objections from the in-house review, I make a motion to approve the continuing education 4.02.
Second that motion.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes.
may, before we move to a vote, when they are approved as providers, forgive me for not knowing the term of approval. How long are they approved?
Some do it for the whole year. Some of the people do. They have their classes all lined up. Like you have the big corporations such as
Okay.
like Batesville.
Yeah.
They'll kind of get all their classes set up for the whole year, and sometimes they actually show all the classes that they have.
Okay.
But it is during the,
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
they do have to apply for each session.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
blanket.
that's- yeah. All right, thank you. That's what I was trying to get at. Thank you.
any more discussion?
Ready for a vote?
Roll call?
Mr. Boyer?
Yes?
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
And Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Motion passes.
And in the compliance section, 5.01, considering a Vita Nero Funeral Home, case number 150006787.
Mr. Chairman, based on reviewing the board meeting, I make a motion to approve the hearing officers' finding of facts.
Do we have a second on finding the facts?
I'll make that motion. Second.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
Mr. Boyer?
Yes?
Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, once again, I make a motion to approve the hearing officers' conclusions of law.
Do we have a second on conclusion of law? Second by Brian. Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Boyer?
Yes?
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, once again, I'd like to make a motion to approve the hearing officer's recommendation.
Second that motion.
Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I made the motion in second, but I do want to say that I believe for a second offense, that I thought that the recommendation was low. But I'm going along with it, but I thought for a second offense, I thought it was low on that, so. Based on what I've seen in the past. That's my own comment.
discussion?
Ready for roll?
Roll call?
Mr. Boyer?
Yes.
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
Mr. Wade?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Item 5.02, report and recommendation for Corrigan Funeral Services, case number 15006761. And the recommendation would be for the finding of facts, and then conclusion of law, and then hearing officer's recommendation.
I'll make a motion to approve the hearing officer's findings of facts.
I second that.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Mr. Boyer?
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
Motion passes.
I'll also make a motion to approve the hearing officer's conclusions of law.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Boyer?
Yes.
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
And finally, I'll make a motion to approve the hearing officer's recommendation.
Second.
Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, once again, this is just repeating myself. I believe the same with this one as in 501, that for a second offense, I thought the $750 fine was low, but I'm still going to support the motion.
That is duly noted, thank you. Any more discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
Mr. Boyer?
Yes.
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Item number 5.03, ratification of settlement. Do I have a motion to ratify the proposed settlement agreements? And that's for case number 20151214.
Point of information, point of order, Mr. Chairman. I've never seen this in my tenure on the board. I don't even know what this is. So that's what I wanted to ask. I've never seen something redacted or a settlement agreement, because that's usually done, once we've charged, that's usually done through the officers. So if you can explain that. I meant to call you, but I don't know what this is.
I'll be on that also.
Huh?
I'll be on it.
Yeah.
I believe Catherine can probably help us.
Um,
And I forgot to welcome our new AG, Catherine Bachbrader. I forgot about you. I'm sorry. She is new. She's on our board now. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. That was my recommendation, that you, first of all, that you vote on settlement agreements that come before the board to approve, that the full board approve them rather than just the officers. And then the redaction is basically a precaution in the event that you would vote no and it would go to hearing. It's best that you not know that a person previously signed a consent agreement, that particular person did. If you don't-
But how do we know? Because what I guess I don't understand is when they were first charged, we gave the we first charged them, we don't know who they are. Then in the minutes, or after the meeting, we know.
Correct.
Then we passed the motions several years ago, giving the authority to the board president to settle, to agree on settlements on behalf of the board. Okay, and you're saying this is just one other step we're gonna take now.
Correct.
But if it's redacted, we don't even know who it is or
Well,
what.
the notice is attached to it, so it tells you what the charges are. So you know what type of charge it is and what they did wrong and what it's, we just don't know their name.
Okay. I'm sure this is done at other boards. I know you have a lot of experience with that, so.
Yes.
This is the proper way that we should.
That's the way that all the boards I'm aware of, they do it in
Okay.
that fashion.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may
Yes.
follow up with Mr. Bosco. Captain, are you making a recommendation to the board? Or-
About the process, not necessarily about the consent agreement, is that what you
Okay,
meant?
yes.
Yes, just
Just about the process.
the manner of voting for it, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm not recommending, making any recommendation about the settlement itself.
Thanks. Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
So based on that, I will make a there's two of these, or is it the same one? We're done.
It's just the consent and then the attached notice of opportunity for hearing.
Okay, so I am actually asking for a motion to recommend the settlement,
To ratify.
to ratify the settlement.
Correct.
I make a motion to ratify the settlement based on compliance section 503, I'm sorry.
There's a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Boyer?
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
And Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, just one other point of information. Catherine, our procedure with the board president, or I think it's the president of the board, being involved in this is not changing.
Correct.
Okay. So
It's just a
we'll-
final at the end.
Gotcha.
The president's still doing the initial approval of whatever that's offered to the person, and then if they accept it, then the full board will just vote to accept the entire, the
Okay.
final decision.
Thank you.
And 5.04 of compliance, recommendation to close cases.
Mr. Chairman, based on reviewing the recommendation of closing, reading each one of those, I see that we really have no choice but to close these other cases, so I recommend to do so.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Mr. Boyer?
Yes.
Motion passes.
And we have item 5.05, pending cases. We have 16 cases pending in the investigation. Has everybody had a chance to review those cases? Any discussion? We'll move on to item 5.06, request for representation. These are a number of cases that's listed with the AAG's office, and that's the November and December AAG reports.
The only thing that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to say is that our executive director has made us aware that Catherine's new position on the board has been so helpful to us and so streamlined and efficient, and we feel like we're in a new day.
Okay, thank you.
So, welcome. And if you ever look, I was very critical of this part of it, so I have to, when I'm happy with the 2 acts.
That's good.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Bob. And moving on to board operations, item 6.01, Inspections. Will be through Eric Anderson and Troy Seahouse. Everybody have a chance to review all the inspections by our fine inspectors? Anybody have any questions for anybody?
Mr. Chairman, just a question, point of discussion. Is there comparative data, since I'm relatively new to the board, on past years that I could benchmark this last year's activity against?
I know during my last inspection, Troy was very detailed on my inspection. He did like 3 times more than what he normally does, so I know he's kicked it up a notch. And even had a Batesville rep sitting there, just wanted to let him know that I do get inspected also, that there's no special treatment of board members. But Troy did kick it up a notch. I haven't seen Eric in action, but
Oh, I
Vanessa
have.
can answer that
Sure.
question.
I can provide a comparative analysis. This report has been around for as long as I am, so we can go back to 2012.
Just this
And-
past 2 or 3 years, that'd be
Sure.
fine. So I can
Would
see-
you like me to put it together on a monthly or just once a quarter, or how would you?
Quarterly would be fine.
Okay.
I think quarterly makes sense.
Sometimes they get slowed down in investigations and
Right.
pre-need fraud and there's other things too, but they have benchmarks and they do stay up pretty good with all those benchmarks.
Well, again,
I'll
there's-
prepare one for next month.
Next month is fine. I think we can just go back maybe this past quarter, starting October 1st, and then comparing it to the same quarter of the prior year.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
will do.
And board operation 6.02, it's our fiscal year 2016 budget review. And we've been providing an update on our budget, if anybody has any questions.
The only question I would have to say, Mr. Chairman, is just to compliment the executive director for managing our funds. Looks like we're on track to be where we're supposed to be.
Any more discussion? We're moving on to item 6.03. IPP 009, conducting board business.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to bring that, bring back onto the table. We tabled last meeting.
I'll second that motion.
No,
Bring it back.
yeah, so I would,
It was
the
tabled.
motion is to remove the item from the table. Is
Yeah.
that correct, Mr. Wilson?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
sorry, yes.
So we have a motion to remove the item from the table for conducting board business.
Ready for roll call?
Yeah, roll call.
Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
And Mr. Boyer?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Now I have a parliamentary question. I made a motion to approve this. That motion then, in the last meeting, that motion is nowhere now because then we made a motion to table it, right?
Right.
Okay. So based on our last meeting, I actually saw, I think we have 2 options here. There is an organization called FARB, which is the Federal Association of Regulatory Boards. And they actually have a model of code of conduct that I sort of thought was a little bit more towards what we were looking at. And I would like to make a motion, if possible, if our executive director and our AAG can develop, based on the FARB model, developed a draft for us to look at and possibly approve at our next meeting. But I'd like other input from other board members if I can.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bosco,
Yeah.
Catherine, are there guidelines that we can access based on Ohio administrative law? I'm looking at how other agencies, and you can't equalize different agencies and the boards, but I'm just looking at other regulatory boards that we could look at in terms of the codes of conduct that they abide by.
I can look into that to see if anyone's done anything similar. There's the ethics law, which applies to everyone. But this is slightly different, a little bit more detailed as far as how you conduct yourselves.
Correct.
I don't know for sure whether anyone's formally adopted a policy like that. I would imagine people have, but I don't know off the top of my head. We can look into that.
I just don't want us to be an outlier. I like what Mr. Bosco has said, but I want to make sure that we're taking in not just federal guidelines, but what we do here in Ohio.
Right. The FARB is just an association.
Well, federation is a federation.
Right,
but-
it's a nonprofit association for regulatory boards,
Right.
and they put on educational programs and things like that, and they put out model laws and rules for various things. It's
Yes.
just one of the things.
Pardon me,
that
I
they've
didn't
done.
mean to say federal. But
No, it's all
yes.
right, but they are a respected organization, so it's probably a good starting point.
Way back when our executive director was on our mother's knee, I was on the Minority Development Financing Board, and we used FAR. So that's our.
So you're sort of aware of the
Yes.
organization.
And I could clarify just a little bit. The one that was presented to you last month, which is much more brief, just a couple paragraphs, was based off of some that have been adopted by some other small boards as well.
Within the state.
Within the state. And so that's where those paragraphs kind of got modeled after. But in looking at the FARB model, presented it as another option because it seemed to be a little bit more in-depth and provide more information even as to why you were putting together the code and what the intent of the code is and things.
Mr. Chairman, that satisfies me.
Okay, we still have a motion on the floor. I'll second that motion.
Was it second already?
No, he didn't second it.
Can I reiterate the motion just to make
Yes,
sure I think I
please.
had it out? Motion to have the executive director and AAG work together to develop a draft code that mirrors the FARB model for the board's consideration.
Any more discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Boyer,
Yes.
Mr. Chandler,
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks,
Yes.
and Mr. Wesco.
Yes.
I just have one question to make sure that Kathy and I understand the expectations. Would you like us to present it when we have a complete entire piece put together, but since it's multiple pages, would you prefer that as we accomplish pieces of it, it comes before the board? In other words, in case Kathy is not able to work with me and get all of it completed before January, would you like to see what we have so far in January, or would you rather us to wait until it's entirely completed?
I would leave that up to you, I think.
Okay.
I don't know, because you'll know, maybe one piece, you may not want to present it because one piece may change another piece you're looking at, so I would say wait.
Yeah, I would rather have the
I just didn't want to
document in its
overcommit.
entirety.
Yeah.
We've,
So, okay, so it does, as soon as you can?
okay, yeah.
If it's not January, for
Yeah,
me,
right.
Right.
whenever you have it.
I appreciate that.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe
We've
there's
just-
a New Year's resolution.
we've given Kathy a lot of cases
Okay.
in the last month. And so I know this is adding one more thing for her to work with me on. And
Okay.
didn't want to overburden her, but thank you. We will try to get it done before.
Is it
next-
Kathy or Kathy?
Either's fine.
Okay.
And we have roll call. We did roll call.
We did.
Yeah,
It
did.
passed.
Yeah. Okay, item 6.04, new legislation. These are revisions requested by OFDA. I do know there's been quite some discussion on pre-need and pre-need fraud and what we're doing about pre-need fraud. And I know in some of the new legislation, we thought that might help to stop some of the pre-need fraud. And we had given our input. Now there's been more input given by OFDA. I think some of it takes the bite out of the new law, but I didn't know if anybody had time to review all those items. So basically, there was a memo that was provided to Representative Schaefer, and it was received from OFDA's lobbyist. The memo included in the agenda item, their first recommendation is to change the makeup of the board. They are proposing one licensed member, also have a crematory operator's license.
Chairman, if I just have a
Okay.
the only concern I have is, I'm fine with the crematory operator's permit, because the makeup of the board already that you have to have someone that has experience with crematory operation. The only concern I have is that they're gonna, from what my understanding is, maybe I misunderstood it, but they're gonna have someone that's a funeral director only on the board, which I have no problem with funeral director only, but with us interviewing apprentices that are coming in that are dual licensees, I just think it would be a little tough on that person to be able to do an interview with someone that has questions about embalming, but they've, that was the only concern that I see with that.
And Mr. Chairman, I sort of also agree with that. I mean, and there are a lot of dual licenses, and, we even had at one time some public members interviewing the embalmers, and when it got into some technical things, the public members were giving their advice that were totally wrong, and there was a lot of confusion going on. And just, with our board being short, 3 licensees now, no, I'm saying currently, there's 3 licensees and 2 public members. Just for example, tomorrow, my interview starts at 9 a.m. and I have an interview every hour on the hour till 4 o'clock. That's a full day, and so I'm thinking, and they're all dual licenses. So even based on that, this makes a lot of sense. I do not agree with the more dual license members we have, the better.
I believe so, too. And were they saying the crematory operator's permit, was that going to require a dual license?
The way I read the memo, it would be one of the people who are already dual would also have to have the operator permit on top of that dual license.
The other question I have was about the crematory review board. I think the initial draft was to, I don't say get rid of it, but to disperse of this crematory review board, which I'm currently chair, and we had a meeting. There's just, apparently, unless I missed something, there's not a whole lot that goes on there unless there's a complaint. So that's the only, I wonder, just with the common sense initiative by the governor and some of the other things, if we wouldn't be better off just, to get rid of it, that, or maybe see if we can change to where they have to meet annually, because there is a cost for all those folks to come in, and for the time, maybe just see if we can meet as needed basis or something. I don't know how that would work. That was the only other thing that I wondered about.
Mr. Chairman, this is the first year since 2006 that I do not sit on the cemetery review board. And last year I was in favor of basically disbanding the board, because since 2006 there's not been one issue that's come before that board, and it's just cost the state money bringing folks in, because it says in law that we have to meet annually, and just that annual meeting was a couple $1,000s, and it's been that way since 2006, and there's not been an issue. And even if there is an issue that comes up, that issue then gets referred to the funeral directors and embalmers board. So it's really, I don't even understand why it's there. So I don't even understand OFDA's thinking on this at all.
there something they wanted the executive director to basically give out licenses without going through the board? So,
Well, that's one of the recommendations on here, Mr. Chairman, that they would like the executive director to issue a license upon a request of a license, like a rubber stamp. And then when the board meets, we ratify that action. Well, I really am not in favor of that at all, simply because, there's no discretion then. So we may be issuing a temporary license to someone that's really should not have a license. And I don't understand, our process seems to be working now. I understand that they want anyone to reply, anyone that requests or applies, they want them to automatically get a license and forego some of the review that we do. Because
We had, in the proposed language, we had proposed issuing a temporary, but we made it at the discretion of the executive director, because we recognize that 99% of the applications that come through, the board does not have a concern with, and for those people, they would be able to get practicing quicker and not have to wait for the board to meet. And for the 1% that there would be potentially a concern of, it would give me the discretion, as we said, to identify that the board should, this should wait for the board, and the board would make the final decision on it. Those that we would issue a temporary to, it's still the board's discretion to deny it. The concern with this language, I agree with you, is that there's no discretion. It's saying that it shall be issued upon receipt of the paperwork. Yeah, it's a must. Our current language, if we left it alone, just requires them to wait for a board meeting, as they currently do. We had proposed it to try to get people into business and licensed as quickly as possible.
and also, were there other terms, assisted and participated, or had to do with an apprentice and possibly his master embalmer, about who was available at the time?
That is new. That is not something that the board discussed at all. That's a proposed amendment from OFDA, where they would like to change the current language of assisted to participated in. This is not something that you proposed or considered or discussed. So this is a new amendment that they would like considered.
this is coming out of left field, and I don't even know what this is.
It's
It really doesn't even say what it's really in regards to, right?
Yeah, in that section of language, it's referring to an apprentice or an embalmer during the performance of their duties as an apprentice. Throughout the language, it speaks to that they have to assist their master in performing specific functions, and they're proposing that those words be changed to participated in instead of assist.
Was there any reason behind the change?
I don't know. I did ask OFDA to be here today to answer any questions that you may have, but they're not here.
Mr. Chairman, just a
Yes.
question as to process, as this legislation moves forward. How is the Ohio Board of Embalmers and Funeral Directors involved? Are you monitoring? Well, I can only go back to my experience on ODOT. We're a larger agency, of course, and had a legislative liaison who was there as these working sessions proceeded, so you could be apprised of how the legislators were thinking and what amendments, surprise or otherwise, they were putting into the bill. How is that being handled in our case?
In this case, we proposed the language, and I found a sponsor, which is Representative Schaefer, and so I'm working on a regular basis with Representative Schaefer's aide, Justin, and so I'm attending any meetings that he has with interested parties, and it has not been introduced yet, and so this is some last input from one of the interested parties, and then Representative Schaefer's office sent me that memo for us to consider whether any of their changes were something that would work for us, or whether we had concerns with them and why.
Okay. Thank you.
Because even some of the language speaks of if somebody does write a trust, whether it's revocable or irrevocable, whether it's a guaranteed product or non-guaranteed product. as to the funeral home actually writes the trust, possibly if it's transferred to another funeral home, that the person that wrote the trust, the funeral home, gets to keep 10% of the monies. Originally, it had the option where if you wrote a guaranteed trust and you transferred to the funeral home, that they got to keep 10%. Now the change goes to whether it's guaranteed or not guaranteed, they get to keep 10%. So if I arranged a $10,000 funeral, and then somebody said, I no longer want to go to Boyer Funeral Home, I want to go to Jack Marshbank Funeral Home, now you have to work with 9,000 of that 10,000. And if somebody guaranteed a product, a certain casket, a certain vault, it's going to be pretty hard for you to do that. So the next question is going to be, are you going to eat that money, or are you going to ask the family to pay the difference since they transferred the fund? Also, when we talked about writing the law, we wanted to ask us a question too. How can we stop pre-need fraud? Well, there was a 30-day time period that allows funeral directors to deposit other people's money into their accounts. And within 30 days, they're supposed to deposit the money, whether it's in a trust or whether it's in an insurance product. So sometimes that money goes into the funeral home's account and then never makes it back out and never funds the trust. And that was some of the issues that we found in the pre-need fraud. I believe Eric and Troy have found some of those cases. So we stated no more commingling of other people's funds into the funeral home's funds. So their reason being is having to do with commissions or keeping part of the money, such as part of the vault sale, to like fund their pre-need. So we feel that 100% of the money should stay in the trust and 100% of the money should stay intact when the family decides to use the money. So that language there has also changed.
Mr. Chairman, just to further go, Ohio is in the top 6 of states in the country having the best pre-need laws, okay, which is really an achievement. And one of the reasons we're in the top 6 is because we have that 100% trust. What I think will take us a little further is by us saying consumers can no longer write a check to a funeral home for the pre-need, but must write it to the trusting organization. So the money does not enter for 30 days into the bank account, the general bank account of the funeral home. It goes right. You know, and I just think that just helps that a little bit longer.
Yeah.
You don't
Right.
have temptation.
And so, and OFDA is recommending that we go to 90, and they're recommending that the funds be able to be commingled. And it was never a good idea. It remains not a good idea, and I would definitely not be in favor of that.
I think it'll streamline the process for the inspectors instead of Troy and Eric having to go and see, well, was it the 31st day that the funeral director wrote the check, you know? Instead, if there's ever, you know, that it goes directly to the trusting agency.
And furthermore, I know we have been criticized by a current public board member that this board does not take pre-need serious. And, you know, we have taken serious, and ever since I've been on this board, I've taken that serious. And this is just one step closer to us getting to, I'd like to see us having the #1 law in the U.S. We're at 6 now, and we're moving up, and I don't think we should let go. So, that's my comment.
There's one other piece that you haven't commented on that needs an input on, is that OFDA also recommended that a courtesy card expire at the end of the 2-year time period, not be able to be renewed. So that would require those individuals to make new applications.
Mr. Chairman, can you explain,
That's what I was
this is
gonna
something
say.
new to Mr. Marshall about the courtesy card?
People from other states who are already licensed as funeral directors and embalmers can apply to Ohio to reciprocate their license and become licensed in Ohio as well. The majority of people do that. But what we did is we put several years ago, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Indiana put together legislation in each one of their states allowing for what's called a courtesy card. And a courtesy card allows them to carry out just a few functions that a funeral director would do and not have to meet all of the requirements that you would to get a reciprocal. So it allows them to come into Ohio to transport bodies out to complete a death certificate. They can't advertise in Ohio or do certain business functions. We only have 4 courtesy card holders right now.
The entire set.
Uh-huh. We have 4.
Because what you can do with reciprocity is far greater, right?
The majority who meet the requirements to become a funeral director and already are licensed choose to take the reciprocal route as opposed to the courtesy card. The 4 people who have the courtesy card wouldn't have been eligible to reciprocate. But right now, law states that all of our licenses expire on December 31st of even numbered years, and they're all eligible to be renewed. So OFDA is proposing that these 4 courtesy card holder permits would not be able to renew and would have to make a new application.
It sounds as though the OFDA and this board are working at cross purposes. To put it mildly.
Well, the history is, it's better than it's ever been.
Good.
Yeah, so we're in the right direction, because there's a lot of things we do agree on. But some of these things come out of left field, and then they're invited to come to the meeting to at least explain some of this, because some of this I don't even understand. And obviously, they're not here, so maybe we'll receive a letter from them further explaining that.
We have, at the time that our prior chair, Mr. Fleming, was the chair, was on the board, and Mr. Warrior and I, we have had multiple meetings with OFDA over the development of the legislation. And some of these things we just have not come to agreement on because we have a different focus in protecting consumers. They do as well, but I believe their focus also is on the industry and their licensees, who are their members. So these are some things that we just have not been able to come together on, and a couple of them are new. The courtesy card and the assisted versus participated in are some new things that we've not had any discussion about before.
Thank you.
Was there any input, though, that the board wanted to give me about the courtesy card, so I knew how to communicate back to Representative Schaefer on that proposal?
Not very many, only 4. So. I said there's not very many. Do they know there's only 4?
Yes.
Do they?
What's the purpose?
I don't know.
That's the only thing I would say. What's the purpose? I don't think it's, I think they should be able to renew just like everyone else.
Okay.
I mean, that's my opinion. Does everyone else agree?
Makes sense.
And then one last thing, and I think it's the last one to
Recovery.
change. Yeah, was the cap?
Right,
Mr.
on the
Chairman?
recovery fund?
Yeah,
Yes.
they're asking for a,
I think we pay $10 for each contract until we reach $2 million.
yeah, they're asking for a $2 million cap, and, you know, based on some of the things I have seen and to avoid administrative nightmares, I think that cap should be raised at least to $5 million, and then cap it. I know there's been one case we have dealt with recently that I think it was over $500,000, just one funeral home that could have possibly applied for this, or consumers could apply for this. So,
Because once this goes into effect, would it be, would they be able to backdate it? Would it go back? Would it be retroactive to help out those people who were frauded if there wasn't?
I think any legislation is from that point forward.
Right, it's not retroactive.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
okay.
it.
Yeah.
But they were thinking about paying $10 until you get to $2 million, and then drop to $5 until they get to $3 million, and then stop collecting money.
You know what they're talking about.
I don't even know how you do that. It's administrative nightmare. I could see capping at $5 million and then, you know, and go from there. So this doesn't make sense.
So it would be, we would be good with a cap, but at 5 million and stop collections after the 5 million for the next year until the fund drops below 5 and then reestablish collection? Okay.
Because like the trust that OFDA plays, it's with the market. They don't guarantee the original deposits. Now, the insurance, if they're licensed in the state of Ohio, they guarantee the original deposit. So that could be another issue if something did happen with the trust. Then that pre-need recovery fund would come in place and help cover the loss for families. Not just the trust, but also for insurance.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Marchbanks, just so you being new and not in the industry, there are basically two ways that a funeral home funds a prepaid funeral contract. One is through some sort of master trust, whether it's at a bank or an association like OFDA, or the other would be insurance companies that are dealing with prepaid funeral contracts. So, and they have different requirements. For example, a trust, you must pay that sales tax currently to the state, and subtract that amount and then put the rest in the trust. Where an insurance product, you're paying all that paid sales tax at another time. So the change of having the consumer write a check to the trust company works fine for insurances, but there's another step that would have to be taken for trust, because now you're gonna have to, I don't know if the consumer has to write a check for the taxes, or maybe the trust writes the check for the taxes. I'm not sure how that would work. So there could be a little pushback from OFDA because they manage and own a trust. So that could be part of the reason of that. That's the only thing I'm thinking of.
Because at the time, the legislators said, if they're going to be pre-needing casket and vaults and merchandise, we want the sales tax now. So sometimes when the family comes in, they'll write one check for the trust, one for the sales tax, and if you send the full amount in, and you pay OFDA too much, they see that you had taxable items, so they'll send you a check back, and then you pay your sales tax at that time.
Yeah.
Yep. Which if the state would wait, they would get more sales tax later than now. So the state would benefit if they waited until later for that tax to be paid. But that's how the tax laws are for the trust. Any more discussion?
I think we covered their proposal.
Just one more general question, Mr. Chairman. Status of the legislation, where does it go from here? Once all this is worked out?
I will report back to Representative Schaefer the board's concerns with some of OFDA's requested revisions. And some of the things, though, that I did hear sounded like we would accept certain things, like adding the operator permit, because we already require one of our licensed members to be experienced in a crematory. So I'll communicate back all of what the board discussed today, and then it'll be Representative Schaefer's, it'll be up to him what he wants to incorporate in the bill and what he doesn't, what amendments he may want to change. And as soon as he's ready to introduce, or if he has any other meetings with interested parties, he'll let me know. And I will keep you apprised as to what's going on.
Thank you.
But we don't have anything else, I believe, that we've asked for to be included. So at this point, we're just waiting for introduction.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to item 7.01. Request by Tommy Caniff to be on the agenda for hiring a stenographer for all future board meetings.
If you want, Mr. Chairman, if you want me to address it, I'm going to say the same thing I said the number of times that this has come up. I'm not in favor of spending that money for a stenographer. I don't really think it's needed. I'd rather take those tens of thousands of dollars and put it towards another inspector going out on this pre-need issue and doing some investigation of that. I don't think we need to spend the money on stenographer.
I agree. Any more discussion? Okay. Item on 7.02, request from Tommy Tana. And we've had this request before, and I'd like to remind the board the memo dated July 22nd, 2015 from Susan Walker is a privileged and confidential attorney-client communication regarding an issue from the July 20, 2015 board meeting. Tommy brought this request before the board our last meeting, and the board already said no. And it's basically, it was basically advice being given and to our executive director and to this board. And since the advice has been given, we basically have followed the advice. And it's not the unauthorized practice of law. It's just a legal opinion or advice from the AG's office to us. Anybody have any discussion or? We'll move on to executive session, item 8.01.
Mr. Chairman, before we move on, a point of information. And I wish Mr. Taniff was here because prior to our last board meeting, after our last board meeting, there was a article that appeared in the Dayton Daily News and that had some quotes from Mr. Taniff that I find insulting. And I want to bring it up, and I just want to make this as part of the record. In this article, he said that one of the subtitles was, "They don't want the oversight." Tommy Taniff was appointed to the Ohio Board of Embalmers and Funeral Directors in December. He says he has struggled to get the board to take action against prepaid funeral fraud. False. The guys that are in the industry, they don't want the oversight. False. False is my comments. They don't want to be critiqued. False. We take critique every month. Or second guess. False again. Or question. False. As a public member of this board, if he really feels that we are not taking pre-need serious, then he needs to step up and take some action and worry about things like this instead of trying to terminate Miss Neatcamp every chance he gets. This upsets me, it's insulting, and since 2006, I've worked on making this pre-need law and trying to stay ahead of any fraud that would take place, and it's just an insulting thing to read. And I just want to go on record, I want to actually talk to the licensees out that will see this film, that this board is concerned about this. I would even like to see if at our next meeting, Ms. Neatcamp, if you can put together in just the last 2 years of steps that we've taken to try to eliminate this pre-need fraud. The meetings we've had, countless meetings, some of our policy changes from our inspection, because a person cannot say this and go on and put this out to the public when it's not true. It's not true. And so if we could have something at the next meeting, just a list, that talks about the meetings we met with, talk about this legislation, how we started that 3 years ago, and where we were to this point. I mean, just something that shows the public and show our licensees that we are working on this.
Would you like me to also include the cases that we've had and what we've done to address?
Yeah, that would be
those
fine.
cases?
Anything you can.
Okay.
Yeah. It just needs, I think it needs to be out there, because a person should not be allowed to just go out and say something like this. And it's a person that sits on this board and is in meetings and hears these things, and it's just crazy.
I will add it to the agenda next month and give you information for the last 2 years.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to say, with all due respect to Mr. Wasco, I hear him. I do not have the record or expertise he has, and I believe him when he says that the board has done everything it can to eliminate pre-need fraud. But I still just want to state for the record that Mr. Taniff is not here to comment on the veracity or the accuracy of his statements. That's all I wanted to say.
I wish he was.
Me too. Me too.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
And item 8.01, confer with the board's attorney.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move the board enter into executive session pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 121.22G3 to confer with the board's attorney concerning a matter involving the board that is subject to pending or imminent court action.
I'll second it.
Second.
Which one? Okay.
discussion, or just go straight to the
You ready?
Does this adjourn the meeting, or we have to come back and adjourn?
We have to come
We have
back
to come
and
back.
adjourn.
Or we'll be here, but we can invite everyone else.
I would recommend though that you go to another room. This room with the doors like they are carries a lot of information outside into the hall.
Okay.
I don't know if you can do that. Announce the meeting to
I don't know, when they go into executive session.
Yeah.
Last time we left everybody here, we went to a different room. It's either way.
I was just
I don't know
concerned
anything
about that.
specific to say that you can't. but-
Whatever
Well,
Kathy
this-
advises, I was just pointing out that.
Right.
I know
These
one
doors.
time we were in an executive session, and I saw shadows and ears right through these cracks. Okay. So
This microphone area, I'm not,
Right. So you saying we should stay right here
Talk quieter.
and talk?
however, that's fine.
It would be, it'd be less risky, I guess. I know for sure that would be fine.
Yeah, so do we have to
Try to be
discuss,
quiet.
are we taking notes? Who's all in attendance of the meeting?
Take. Yep.
The board can invite whoever you choose in the meeting. and
No
choose
notes
who you
are
don't.
taken, no votes are made, and we can invite who we choose and not choose. Is that correct?
Mhm. You ready for me to call the roll?
Roll call.
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Boyer?
Yes.
And Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Can you turn the
Cameras
camera
off, okay. Session. So now we're at 9.01.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion?
Oh, you know, I do have one discussion. Our next regular meeting,
Mhm.
I can tell you now, I'm gonna have a problem with. I'm not gonna be,
It's 11th, right?
Yes.
it's the 11th.
Mhm. It's early in the month because of
Martin Luther King
Martin
Yeah,
Luther
holiday.
King.
and I'm gonna be out of the country until, the 15th, I think.
Okay. I will tomorrow then send out an email looking for
Another
new
day.
dates between that date and the February meeting date.
Very good. And I'd also like to add, Mr. Chairman, Vanessa, that we have orientation at Ohio University on that date, the 11th, so it would be very difficult for me to get here in time for the 1 o'clock meeting.
Okay. So I will send out new proposed dates and coordinated dates when we have a forum.
Any other-
Isn't there a holiday, there's, Martin Luther King Day, right?
That's on the 18th,
When, that's on the following,
Yes.
following Monday.
but we can, the 19th would be okay to meet. I mean, that could be a day, right?
Mhm.
Because we don't have to stick with Mondays. we can
No,
stick
you
with
don't have to stick
Tuesdays.
with Monday at all. And since we're putting it together so early, we'll have plenty of time to give notice of a
Okay.
different date.
Any other discussion? Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and roll call.
Oh, Mr. Wasco?
Yes.
Mr. Boyer?
Yes.
Mr. Chandler?
Yes.
Mr. Marchbanks?
Yes.
Motion approved, and we are adjourned.